Hey, what up, guys? It's Goblin Kings here with another deck tech. Today we're going to be going over Send Triplets in honor of its defeat of that piece of shit Goblin deck that this channel is based off of. So, what we got here is a 5 mana 3/3 Esper. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. That turn, that player can't play spells or activated abilities and plays with his or her hand revealed. You can play cards from that player's hand this turn. Now, a lot of deck builds are going to be about kind of upkeep manipulation, like choosing as many people as possible, and then using their hands against them and to win the game in general. But I just use, in this deck, she's just used as a control aspect, and it doesn't necessarily need to be played to win, but can seriously help your odds of winning by just stealing their hand. It also stops counter spells from the player you choose, which is really, really, really good when you're playing these big bombs. And you don't have to worry about, that one player who is counter stuff countering them. So first things first, we're going to go through a land base. So the deck in general is Super Friends. So it's going to be a lot of Planeswalker, Proliferate, and just Esper good stuff. So we got Karn's Bastion, Exotic Orchard. Karn's Bastion is really good for the Proliferate and bumping up Planeswalkers a little more so you can ult them. Ancient Tomb, which is just quick mana. Temple of the False Gods, which is just Ancient Tomb, but with a little more requirements. Urborg's really good for, because we have a lot of high black mana stuff and Planeswalkers in here. So this is really good for fixing also with a few other cards of Swamp Walk. So Maze of Ith, this deck is not very creature heavy, so you won't really be able to block a whole lot. And there will be a bunch of ways like Maze of Ith to really stop being attacked. So we got Reliquary Tower. We're playing blue, so we're going to be drawing a ton of cards. And this is a good way to keep our hands from being discarded. Strip Mine, because land removal is really good. Command Tower, and then we get into our fetches. So for fetches, this is not a custom. It's custom made, but it's not. It's made of cards that I had around and pulls. So it doesn't have every land that I need in it. All the duels. So it's made up of a bunch of weird fetches, but they all work the same, and it doesn't really affect anything at all. So we got Prismatic Vista for our first fetch, Flooded Strand, Polluted Delta, and then Fabled Passage from the new Eldraine set, which is, it's basically just it's just Prismatic Vista, but not as good. But turn one, when you're not doing a whole lot, maybe a Soul Ring or not, it doesn't really make a huge difference. So then we have our shocks. I think we have all the shocks that we need. So we got Watery Grave, Hallowed Fountain. These work really well with the fetch lands, and these are going to be usually what you're going for. And then just a few extra lands, a few extra pulls, some nice foils that I had in here to help fix that mana more. So Caves, Isolated Chapel, and then the deck has an artifact sub-theme because of a few artifact planeswalkers. So we have a few, all the artifact lands for the colors, excluding Darksteel Citadel, just to increase the amount of artifacts that we have on the battlefield. Because Send Triplets is an artifact too, so she does help a lot with that. And then just for style points, all the basics are full art snows. There's nothing with snow in here, it's just kind of a personal preference of mine. Alright, so then we're going to jump into enchantment. So Leyline of the Void, this deck is mostly built around shutting down decks and then just taking over control when they run out of gas. So there's a lot of hate in here to certain archetypes. So like this takes care of graveyard decks. Leyline of Anticipation is really good for just playing at your speed. A lot of these spells are pretty strong, so having the ability to play them when you want instead of at sorcery speed is really powerful, especially with this card. Getting Send Triplets out right before your upkeep, so it's not on the board for that long, is a really, really, really good way to get a cheap kind of shot on your opponents. And then land tax, just to make sure that we have the mana that we need. It's an old and kind of expensive card, but if you can find a cheap one, like I found this one at a vintage stock, it's definitely a good one to just pick up. Propaganda. There's a bunch of prison in here just to stop, because we don't have a lot of creatures, remember, so we have to stop attacks as much as possible. Then we have Oath of Fury, a really good way for planeswalkers to ult quickly or just get way more value out of them. And then the bounce. The bounce doesn't really do a whole lot, but occasionally you can use it to like reset a planeswalker. And then Ghostly Prison, just white propaganda, more don't attack me kind of stuff. Really saves you. The issue with these two is that they don't have to pay 2 when they're attacking planeswalkers. So it really just protects you. And your planeswalkers are still open. So a lot of them will die just because those won't save them. But there's one other thing in here that will help you. So for creatures, we're not running a whole lot. It is a pretty small group. I believe I have more planeswalkers in here than I have creatures. But so Clever Impersonator is a really good creature to have, even though it's not a creature half the time that you play it, just because people have good stuff in their decks, and you know, why can't you have good stuff too? So Glenelendra is 2 non-creature counterspells on a stick, and she's a 2/2 flyer, so she can block for you if need be and persist, or most notably she's just going to counter 2 spells, which is really annoying. And if you can do anything with counters by putting counters on her, there's a bunch of swords and stuff in here. You can just make that a repeatable counter spell. Auroch Champion, really powerful against token decks, against creature-based decks, pro black and red. So it's a good way to just gain a bunch of life. And I think it's the only way to gain life in this deck. So then we got Runescar Demon, just a 6/6 for 7 mana that lets you Demonic Tutor. Just good value, good blocker, just a strong creature in general. So Consecrated Sphinx, another strong creature that also lets you just draw cards. 2 on each person's, each opponent's. Well, whenever an opponent draws a card, you get to draw 2, so pretty good value. Then there's a lot of life gain decks that I played over the evolution of this deck, because it's evolved over the years. So Erebos is a good way to stop a lot of life gain decks that I played against that use like Aetherflux Reservoir and then just one-shot everyone. So it's a good way to really cap that off, and it's super hard to remove. So that's in one pile. And Sun Titan. A lot of the planeswalkers and permanents in here are like 3 or less. A lot of the good ones are. So this is a really easy way to just keep replaying them for value. Hushbringer is another one of the hate cards that shuts down a lot of sacrifice-based decks or ETB value-based decks. Full art also, which is pretty nice. And it's a flying lifelink at 2 mana, so you can start off the game, get a little bit of life, block with it later, but notably it shuts off things like Aura Shards, it shuts off just a lot of those stronger ETB effects. Then for value and for strength, we have Yennet, 3/5 Flying Vigilance Menace. She is fantastic in this deck. There's a lot of odd creatures and planeswalkers, so you can just value town out, swing, deal some damage, and then just put a planeswalker on the battlefield for free. Or you could get Sheoldred on the field for free, which is really good. So Sheoldred's in here to kind of hate on Tron decks, anything that's has a really strong commander that's alone most of the time. And then if any of your creatures die, usually your graveyard doesn't have any creatures in it, but if they do, you can really get them back with Sheoldred. Then Deep Glow Skate to ult planeswalkers really quickly. You could just cast a planeswalker if you have enough mana, and then ult it with Deep Glow Skate immediately after. So we're going to move on to artifacts. For fixing, we got Chromatic Lantern, Soul Ring. Moxes are expensive, so I have Mox Tanalite. Coalition Relic is a really good pull for fixing, and if you can proliferate at all, it can be even better. Thran Dynamo, really good one. It's a good one if you can get a turn 1 or a turn 2 Thran Dynamo, and then just get a ton of mana. So Silent Arbiter just hates against token decks. It definitely shits on Goblin decks specifically, or sells near tokens. And there's not a whole lot that they can do about it, since you have a bunch of removal and counters and stuff like that. Ensnaring Bridge is really the GOAT for just saving yourself. There's been too many occasions where this has ended up on the battlefield. I have no creatures out, and everybody else has 10/10s or something like that, and it just stalls the game until you can find an answer. So Sword and Truth and Justice, because it has Proliferate, and it helps your planeswalkers a lot, and your creatures can get bigger. Sonora's Annex is the one prison that protects your planeswalkers, and they can pay white or Phyrexian for it, so they're either going to hurt themselves, which isn't too bad, but it adds up eventually, or pay white. And then one of the GOAT cards, one of the win cons in this deck is Magnificent Lattice. So this card and another card, one of 2 other cards are needed to win the game in a really stupid, cheap way. That's usually just kind of left up to last resort. So we're going to move on to Sorcery. For Sorcery, we got a Steer Command as the perfect kind of all-in-one board wipe. Just really effective at protecting yourself, hurting everybody else. Winds of Abandon, super underrated card. Sure, it gives them a lot of land, but if you can win the game really quickly, with this one, it doesn't really matter. Acquire's really strong. The meta that I kind of play in with the play group that I'm in, there's a lot of artifact decks, like 3 or 4 artifact decks that can be playing at once. So having the ability to kind of poach, Blight Steals or Magnificent Lattice out of other people's decks is really strong. Ancestral Vision, it's one of the only card draw spells in here. So it's just an ancestral, a good way to draw 3 cards. Sure, it's suspend 4, but it's not terrible. So Elder Spell, this is a good way to just ult your planeswalkers immediately and make sure that you are the only one with planeswalkers. When this spell is cast, if there are a bunch of targets, you can usually just ult any planeswalker on your battlefield, and then of course Demonic Tutor to find the things that I need. So Anguished Unmaking is the first of our instants. Instants are going to be mostly removal and counter spells. So Pact of Negation, 0 mana counter spell, Utter End, just another exile removal. Almost all the removal is exile, because in the playgroup there's also a ton of Eldrazi, like Ulamog, that we just can't deal with without it. So Dovin's Veto is a really good counterspell. The OG. Force of Negation, just a cheap Force of Will with not as good abilities. Swords to Plowshare, good removal. Mystical Tutor, just more tutors for instant sorcery. And the Reality Shift, a very it's a great card in Commander. The exile target creature is very strong. In the Manifest, 9 times out of 10, it's like a land or an instant or sorcery, and it's just something that they don't want on their battlefield at all. So we'll get through that. And now the main part of the deck is the Planeswalkers. So we got a Johnny Steadfast. His +1 doesn't do a whole lot because of the lack of creatures. Every once in a while, you can put it on like a demon and get some damage in. And then there's also the real strong part. The strong part of him is the loyalty counters and the +1/+1 counters to help bump your planeswalkers up faster. And the best card in the deck is the foil Liliana of the Veil. It works really well with Sun Titan because it's 3 mana. So you can make your opponent sacrifice a creature, they kill it, and then you just bring it back and do it again. Or the discard. It's really good early game at just emptying those hands. So Sorin is a better late game planeswalker. It just does good damage. It's pretty versatile on what it does. It gives you card draw. And the ult's not fantastic in Commander simply because board wipes exist. But if it's allowed to go without anybody stopping it, it really just kicks into gear. So we got Jace Balerion, the spellbook foil. He's basically just card draw for 3 mana. Tezzeret the Seeker is a good way to find a lot of the like Ensnaring Bridges, Soul Rings, anything that we need. I never ult with them simply because that's just not how this deck works. And then the untap is really great with like Thran Dynamo and Soul Ring. So we got Karn, the Great Creator, which is the second part of our 2-card combo, one of the 2-card combos, with Mycosynth. So activated abilities or artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated, meaning all the permanents are artifacts of Mycosynth Lattice, so their lands can't be tapped for mana, and they can't play spells anymore. So, pretty strong, locks out the game. Then all you have to do is have a creature on the battlefield and win. Then we have Karn Liberated. He's just very good. Exile, removal, getting things out of the hand. Ulting is pretty rare because most people just concede at that point. But when you can, it's pretty fun. So Ashiok Nightmare Weaver just kind of poaches creatures away from a lot of creature-oriented decks and gives you something to put on the battlefield. They have Liliana, the Last Hope. So Ashiok and Liliana are also creatures that work really well, or planeswalkers that work really well with Sun Titan. The ult is really what this one's all about. The +1 is okay, but if you can just cheaply ult it, that's where the value comes from. So Sorin, one of the best planeswalkers in the deck, just cast him and then target opponent's life total becomes 10 from 40. It can definitely just shut someone out of the game, and if Sorin's allowed to live for more than a few turns, they're just going to die from his +2, which is pretty impressive. Then we have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the Scourge of Dominaria Standard. Just as good in Commander. He just lets you untap for counterspells, and he can get rid of threats, and then his ult is pretty much just game winning if you have a Consecrated Sphinx out or something like that, and you just start exiling everything that they control. This Jace's ult is pretty good. No, it just counters everything. And then the card draw and the bounce is really powerful. 5 mana is a little steep, but once he's out, he usually stays for a while. So this is the one of the 2 combos with Mycosynth Lattice. So he makes everything cast for way less because all your permanents are artifacts with Mycosynth, and then his +2 can deal a ton of damage when you have that many artifacts. Other than that, he's not great without it. So Ashiok Dream Render just stops all tutors, stops ramp, a lot of search ramp, and then you can mill people, and also Graveyard Hate. She's a great card in this deck, really strong. Elspeth's good at building a board state. The ult's not great because you don't have so many creatures, but she's a kind of an austere command on a stick, and just a repeatable 3/1/1s. So Liliana, real good, 6 mana, makes zombies, and whenever anything that you control dies, you get to draw a card. The sacrifice 2 creatures is great for removing big boys that you can't exile. And then finally we have Teferi, Time Raveler, which shuts down counterspells, lets you bounce, and lets you kind of ley line of anticipation for sorcery. So in all, it's a really very controlling deck. It's fun for you, but not for your opponents. It's definitely games that you'll get into where they're just sitting there, not being able to do anything, and you're just waiting to cast your next spell to control them even more, or to just flat out end the game. But yeah, thanks for watching. Leave a like and a subscribe. Tell us what deck tech you want us to do next. We won't do it. We're just going to do one of our own. Sorry about it. Signing off.